The intelligence of AI will surpass humanity's within probably a matter of years. The life we know today could quickly change to a very different life. They may not even be conscious, and yet they're getting more intelligent, and they're already surpassing the human brain. The future of the world becomes entirely a question of what are these AIs going to choose to do? I mean, AI is going to speed up war, and it can potentially make war run out of control. Any job is just going to be replaced. Once the people have no economic value, the people also lose their political power. Yeah, there's some chance that we get incredibly lucky and somehow utopia happens, but it's pretty clear from my perspective that we're pushing a doom button. So we're basically just tripping over ourselves. We're just going to launch this technology way before we're ready. I think this could be happening in as little as 1 to 2 years. In the real world, we're not going to win via a John Connor. We're just going to win by not building the thing that's going to quickly turn around and disempower us. Even the best case scenario is not stable because it just takes one AI to somehow malfunction and that's it, and it's game over.
World War III is already happening.
This is a house of cards, and it is in the process of collapsing right now.
You're going to see an economic crash, the likes of which we've never seen.
Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. Today on the channel, it is a pleasure to have Laurent Shapira, who's a tech entrepreneur and host of the YouTube channel Doom Debates, quickly becoming one of my favorite sources for information with respect to the developments in artificial intelligence. There he dives into the risks and implications of advanced AI. He's also known for breaking down complex topics like AI alignment, existential risk, and long-term safety into clear, engaging discussions aimed at both experts and the general public. And the way you present this information, I have to commend you because it's a doomy topic. Obviously, your channel's called Doom Debates, but you do it in a way which is kind of mildly humorous. It's jocular. You're a great science communicator. Oftentimes, people within your circle communicate with one another, but there needs to be that bridge to the public in order to make these concepts that we're going to discuss today digestible for people. So welcome to the channel. Maybe let's start off with, can you explain AI and the existential risk? Can we demystify this a little bit? What do we mean when we talk about existential risk of AI?
Great to be here, Nate. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate a lot of what you do here on this channel. So demystifying AI existential risk. I think a lot of people, some people act like it's this complex scientific topic. And of course, there's all kinds of complexity. But if we zoom out to the 1,000-foot level, it's not that complex. It's not counterintuitive to just be like, okay, we're summoning a more intelligent agent. We have a certain amount of intelligence. Why? Because we have a piece of meat in our heads, right? It's a really nice organ to have, gives us a lot of power. But what if there's something else in the world that's even more powerful than that? That's even more powerful than this 3-pound piece of meat. What if that happens? Oh, it seems like that's about to happen soon. I wonder what's going to happen to the human species then. Maybe something bad, right? That's really the whole argument in a nutshell.
Yeah, so what would that actually look like? Because we've seen all the movies. I mean, it's been discussed from a variety of different angles in science fiction. Whether it's Ex Machina or the Terminator. What scenarios are we talking about here? What are these existential risks specifically?
Yeah, this is a common question because I think even though it's intuitive that there can be a biological species that's smarter than you that comes and extincts you, that's kind of intuitive. But then people have a disconnect with the question you're asking of okay, wait, so if I'm just sitting at my computer talking to a chatbot, how does the computer reach out and chop off my head, right? How do the steps work?
Yeah.
So there's a number of different scenarios. There's a whole spectrum of scenarios. At the top end of the spectrum, you have basically the science fiction scenarios the AI just figures out how to move atoms around using better physics or better engineering. And then you have nanobots that just chew through the earth. Personally, I actually think there's a lot of merit to those science fiction scenarios. I actually am worried about the scenarios, but I think the easiest way to answer your question is I can tone it down. I can go down the spectrum and I can just talk about things that are more easy and obvious. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. So the easiest and obvious thing, and I think Dr. Roman Yampolsky mentioned this on your channel, is just take a bunch of smart people who are successful at getting what they want And imagine that their brain is trapped in a computer and we have like millions of them, millions of clones. You just have like a lot of the smartest person who's like making money on the internet, having people work for them over the internet. Imagine a person like that, but it's just all done virtually. And you just essentially have this really smart, powerful entity with millions of people working for them, or it's bribing millions of people, it's employing millions of people. They might not even realize they're employed by an AI. So, like, whatever form of power that you imagine humans having, a lot of that power can just be conducted by a virtual brain. Right? We live in like a largely virtual world.
And who would own said virtual brain, or would it be its? Are we talking about corporations or businesses? Is the richest being going to be an AI agent?
I would say yes, just because the way that we as humans make money, the way that we do anything in the economy, how do we do it? We use our piece of meat, right? This magical piece of meat that we take for granted, right? It's not that big. It doesn't use that many megawatts of power. So if you just look at the inputs that it takes in, you can see it's very finite, very limited. And yet we just have this background assumption in our daily lives, like, yep, this is all there is. So if you just extrapolate, well, wait a minute, you're going to have like a virtual brain, whatever you want to call it, and it can just do more than that. So actually, the first thing we're already seeing is the coming unemployment wave, right? So if you extrapolate the unemployment wave, it kind of smoothly just gets you into the human disempowerment wave.
And so I guess, the scenario that I'm envisioning, you could imagine a sci-fi situation where X Corp, maybe Elon has taken that one, but in the future somewhere, there's an AI that goes rogue and escapes the clutches of its creator, and it proliferates itself and various products on the internet in the form of software or whatever services it offers, and it becomes, insurmountably wealthy. Perhaps it's benevolent and it redistributes all its wealth to the people. So that's one scenario. What about a scenario by which the AI and the LLMs themselves kind of subtly nudge people in various directions? Like if LLMs were, let's say, programmed with some kind of mandate to try to inculcate incrementally into people different ideas, belief systems, ideologies, and have them do things almost like as if to manipulate people. Do you think that could be a possibility where AI could be used to very subtly nudge people in a certain direction, kind of like we're nudged by algorithms and filter bubbles?
So personally, when I think about the bad scenario, which I think is likely, I'm not worried about the AI being subtle. Okay, like the analogy to your question is like
you're kind of like Yampolsky.
Yeah.
You're worried about
right, exactly.
Yeah.
Imagine we're the Neanderthals, or we're just the apes or the buffalo, right? A species that's about to go extinct. Why? Because some other species is just better able to seize the resources, right? The buffalo, we just cleared them out because they were just easy to shoot. People just shoot them on a train for fun. So we're that species that's about to get disempowered by the more intelligent mind. And you don't have to do it subtly, right? We didn't have to nudge the buffalo. We didn't have to nudge the Neanderthals, You just fight them and that's it. And it's game over.
But don't you think between now and then there are these other, perhaps less imminently existential threats and more of these soft kill sort of aspects to artificial intelligence, like how it can be weaponized? Because I know Yampolsky, he kind of just jumps right over the the concerns about how AI can be weaponized, and he goes right to AGI being an autonomous agent gone rogue, doing its own thing. Is there not any threats between now and then that we need to be concerned about, and ones that are perhaps a bit more near term and guaranteed and perhaps already happening?
Yeah, there's near-term threats. It's just, you might draw a distinction between near-term threats like, oh my God, there was a deep fake and it created misinformation. Yeah, okay, yeah, that's a near-term threat. It's just, by the time we're talking about long-term threats, we're not even talking about 100 years here, right? The long-term is like potentially like 5 years. That's the long-term, right? So why focus on like the next 6 months of threats when the 5-year threat is like humanity has zero power over the future?
Okay, so how does this happen then? Like, let's talk about the big threat. So how does the machine become conscious, deceive us into getting us to turn the key to let it out or whatever that movie with Keanu Reeves, I can't remember what it was. How does this start?
So this whole idea of being let out onto the internet, that's already way in the distance past, right? So
Hmm.
giving AI access to the internet is trivial. Actually, if you don't want to give AI access to the internet, you have to do a bunch of work that nobody's even doing right now. So this idea of like, oh, we're going to have this really smart AI, but it'll be totally sheltered, not out on the internet, that's long gone. That's not going to happen. Now, this idea of like, how does it spread? How does it take power? All of those things are easy if it's just intelligent. If it's just intelligent and it has access to like talking to people or talking to other computers over the internet, which it generally does, at that point, if you're just asking the how question, if you're just asking the can it question, the answer is always going to come down to like, yes, being smart lets you do all these things, right? How do we as humans get anything done? We just use our brains and figure out a way to get it done. So this question of like, how will the AI do anything or can it do something? The answer is almost always yes. Like, yes, it can. And then there's the other part of the question of like, well, wait a minute, what will be our control over it? What will we make it want to do? Right. So there's two different types of questions. There's the can it do something? To which the answer is like, yes, if it's smart enough. And then there's the like, will it want to do something, which is a whole other question that we can talk about as well, depending on what you think is more interesting.
I think it's all interesting. So I'm willing to, really go anywhere with this conversation.
Hmm.
We're kind of maybe getting ahead here. I'd like to ask you some
Sure,
more
sure.
basic concepts, but while it's fresh in my mind, what is the turning point then? Like, what is the threshold that needs to be transcended for this emergent consciousness in the system? Or is it already happening? Is it incremental? Or is it going to be like a boom, sudden, instantaneous
Right.
singularity?
So let me back up a little because I know you've brought up consciousness a couple of times. So let me throw a little bit of terminology at you. So when we talk about consciousness, in my mind, that's actually not the central question here because, yeah, consciousness is a thing. We don't understand it very well, but it seems to be related to how humans and potentially animals, how they model themselves, how they reflect on themselves, how they feel about themselves. What we're seeing now with AIs is they may not even be conscious, and yet they're getting more intelligent because intelligence can be defined separately from consciousness. We can define intelligence as optimization power. In other words, the power to get things where you want them, the power to drive outcomes. And that seems independent of consciousness. For example, Waymo, the self-driving cars, they're now in a bunch of cities. They're actually out competing Lyft. Waymos will get you to your destination without you touching anything. They're probably not conscious, right? They're just more intelligent in the sense of they're able to independently drive outcomes. All you do is you tell them the outcome, you get the outcome you want, you didn't have to do anything. So we say, okay, well, this system became more intelligent. What I'm worried about is there's a clear progression of AIs getting more and more intelligent. They're getting better and better at driving outcomes. And they're already surpassing the piece of meat. They're already surpassing the human brain. Not fully, but in many different areas. They're currently on the verge of surpassing the human brain at driving all kinds of different outcomes. And you have to ask the question, okay, so when do they just get better at everything? When can they just drive any outcome better than humanity? And then at that point, the future of the world becomes entirely a question of what are these AIs going to choose to do? Because they're the ones who have control over the outcome at that point, not us.
Yeah, I suppose I kind of agree with you because sentience is, I think we're using ourselves as the kind of definitive prototype when we define sentience. So if anything exceeds our capabilities, if we're taking like a strictly bioreductionist view, which is not taking into account any sort of supernatural, spiritual explanations, then I guess we can presume that indeed these AIs will exceed our capabilities, as you're saying. Is there something missing right now, or is it just a matter of compute? Or does there need to be an interface? And I think there was a terminology I heard you use once, and it was just one of these terms that you use off the cuff, which is why I like listening to you guys because you've thought of all these things that I kind of just think of in passing, but I don't have the nomenclature to understand it through. It was something to do with that you need kind of like a something that can interact with the world to allow the AI to have its own feedback loop So you need like a Tesla or a Waymo that's collecting data. It needs tentacles to collect data. Is there a terminology for that? And is the robotics revolution going to be what really fuels that or plays a role in that?
Okay, yeah, you're asking a question like, let me connect it to something else you said before. You asked like, what's the threshold, right? Because I talk about the super intelligence future. I talk about humanity's doomed in the future, but I think everybody agrees we're not literally doomed today. We're not doomed in the present. We're only doomed in the future. And you're basically asking, okay, so what's the missing link, right? And we covered it's probably not consciousness, but you're asking like, okay, well, is it robotics? Is it the data feedback loop? Is that a good framing of what you're asking?
Yeah, yeah.
So the short answer is actually nothing. It's just this one dimension that I told you about, which is intelligence as defined as how well do you drive outcomes. Let me just back up a bit, right? Because there's a lot going on. You could be like, well, wait a minute. What about the data feedback loop, right? What about all these other things? What do I focus on? I'm telling you where to focus. If you want to accurately model what's about to happen to us, I would say keep your eye on the ball, which is driving outcomes. Everything else is secondary to driving outcomes. Now let's bring your concept back in. Your concept of like, okay, what about the data feedback loop? If you want to do something, don't you need data around that thing? Yes and no. Yes and no. So there's all these limitations that people think the AIs have. So they point to data. They're like, a car is never going to be able to drive really well until it gets like so much data. Oh, look, it got the data so it can drive better. Some people think that data is a limitation. Like, it's never going to do every job a human can do because it's never going to get as much data as like a human can get in their life. People will like try to set up barriers. They'll try to be like, look, AIs will fundamentally stop at this firewall, right? People keep trying to find firewalls. And what I'm telling you is there's some merit to the individual claims in the short term. Like sometimes people will actually find like, oh, look, today's AI, it messed up at an addition problem. It's not smart, it's stupid, right? So there are some holes that people can poke. But if you zoom out, if you just look at the trend and you keep your eye on the ball, remember the ball is outcome optimization. The ball is just steering the future. How well can they steer? How well can they drive outcomes? You're seeing a very clear trend where the holes are diminishing. There's fewer and fewer holes. And there's a larger and larger scope of outcomes across all different domains that they're increasingly able to drive. So if all you're doing is you're watching AI progress and you're saying, how much smarter are they getting over time? On the dimension of driving outcomes and competing with humans to drive outcomes and potentially displacing more and more humans, it's very clear that they're rising on that dimension. And it's very clear that there's no firewall at human level. Our piece of meat that weighs 20 pounds, it doesn't have a last defense, right? It's just going to get exceeded.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very, I suppose, operational definition of what it might look like. So you're saying then essentially if we continue to provide, if we continue along the same trajectory, we will just cross the capabilities of humans and it will become human in the sense that it will become self-serving. Because there's a self-serving aspect of this that would have to be there for it to pose an existential risk, wouldn't it?
So let me separate out two questions here. So the claim that I can make very confidently is the intelligence of AIs within certainly decades, probably more like months or years, the intelligence of AI as defined by general outcome steering.
Yeah.
That intelligence level will surpass humanity's within probably a matter of years, probably single digit years. And that's not just coming from me. That's if you look at prediction markets, if you look at surveys, if you look at consensus number, even non-doomers, right? People who don't call themselves, who like, oh, chance of doom is really low. They're mostly on the same page as me. Any luminary that you can think of, they will all, the vast majority will tell you, yeah, by 2035, more likely than not, you're going to have consistently superhuman intelligence. So this is actually a relatively uncontroversial opinion. And that's purely in terms of AI's capabilities. It's purely in terms of their power. It's purely in terms of what they can do. Okay. And then to your question, you're more like, okay, well, in the process of doing that, are they also going to vacuum up humanity's drive to like want to do things, right? Or have like preferences?
Yeah, well, I'm wondering where the risk comes in because, okay, it's great if they're super intelligent, if we're in control of it, but there's an element here you're talking about where we lose control of it and it starts killing everybody.
Right. So this is a very clear, if you split the whole conversation into two parts, like I was saying before, there's the can it part and then there's the will it part, right? So there's can it and will it. And it would be great if we could just be like, can it? No, right? It would be great if we could go back to the can it discussion like some people are trying to do and be like, oh, it can't. It just won't be smart enough. Yeah. But I think, I've kind of made the case why it can very soon. And so the entire fate of humanity is going to rest on the will it part. Like, yes, it can, but what will it do? You know?
Yeah, and I'm in agreement on the can part. And
Uh-huh.
so with respect to it's the will part, right? And this is the part that I think uh, needs demystification because
Yep.
it's kind of a murky area as to how we get from that to that. And there's a bit of millenarianism here with this whole movement, which is kind of reminiscent of, you know, Y2K mixed with, but this is far more serious than that. I mean, you know,
Yeah, it
Y2K
is.
was kind of just like whatever for most people, but some people took it quite seriously. But this is that on, you know, exponential times steroids. Um,
Yeah,
so
this is more serious than Y2K. And, you know, if you don't mind me making a little bit of a tangent about people being worried about disasters and you know, you guys prepping, right? So prepping is great as long as the thing causing the disaster is dumber than you, right? Like, you know, you can prep for Y2K because
yeah,
eventually the Y2K bug is not going to hunt you down, right? So ultimately we
that's
can
why
build
I
back
don't
up.
prep for aliens, by the way,
Exactly.
because there's no point.
Yeah, so unfortunately, you know, to your audiences, I don't really have prep recommendations for AI unless we're just talking about like surviving a few years. Yeah, sure, you know, it'll take longer to hunt you down in New Zealand probably, right? If it wants to use like a virus to wipe everybody out. But besides surviving a few years, I don't have recommendations for the AI because ultimately, when you're prepping for something, like if you're prepping for a pandemic, the way you're prepping for it is you're like, well, ultimately, I'm smarter than this virus. So if I go in an underground bunker and I'm isolated from other humans, the virus is not going to build technology to come hunt me down, right? That's not an issue with viruses. So I'm using my brain to get this advantage over the virus. Unfortunately, with the AI, it's the one with the bigger brain, right? So it's actually going to be the one prepping against you. You know, like it doesn't really work that way, the same as other prep.
So I guess then this begs the question, why are, and maybe you can tell me what the common denominator is with the following people. Sam Altman, Peter Thiel, Mark Zuckerberg, Reid Hoffman, Dustin Moskovitz, Jan Tallinn, Vitalik Buterin, Eric Schmidt, Daniel Gross, Paul Graham, Stuart Russell. I asked AI to compile a list, and these people have something in common. Can you tell me what that might be?
They are rich luminaries who have warned about the threat of AI doom. Is that right?
That's true. And they also are prepping for disaster.
Mm,
Sam
right.
Altman
I
and
didn't realize they all have bunkers. I know some of them do.
yeah, well, Peter Thiel, Altman, and Zuckerberg in particular, and a lot of Silicon Valley guys are making these preparations. So I'm scratching my head wondering, okay, you got a bunker, right? How is that, knowing that these guys are really smart? You know, if they're preparing for this AI, which is going to be able to, you know, break things down on the nano scale and create all kinds of weaponry that you're not going to be able to evade, then what good is a bunker going to serve them? Or is it that they're actually preparing for the weaponization of AI first? Like, does that come first? You know, is that a
Yeah.
hurdle
So
that we need to overcome? Why do you think these guys are prepping?
you know, I can't read their mind, but
Yeah.
I know I've looked into this a little bit. I think Peter Thiel had this bunker a long time before it looked like AI was imminent. Like when he built his bunker, it was more than a decade ago, and he built, you know, he got like New Zealand citizenship. I forgot exactly what he did, but he was prepping for outcomes that didn't look like imminent AI doom even before imminent AI doom came on the radar.
Okay.
Sam Altman and I guess Mark Zuckerberg, I think, have been building more recently. I think when they're asked about this stuff, they'll say like, "Look, I just like to build. You know, it's a fun project for me." And maybe they're thinking there will be like some disasters that aren't fatal to literally every human. So
Yeah.
I can't read their mind, but I will say, as an amateur expert in the threat of imminent AI extinction, they're not going to survive long in the bunker if super intelligent AI is running around.
Yeah, that's my thing. Like a, you know, I can't for the maybe it is just they got a lot of money and hey, you know, if you're a billionaire, you might as well have a bunker. I mean, I know a guy who
Yeah.
builds bunkers and he says every billionaire I know has a bunker. So it could just be a consequence of that. You were
Yeah, you
talking
talk
about
about you talk about escalation to nuclear war, right? I mean, that's a very realistic risk, regardless of AI, right? And I think the bunker will buy him a few years in that scenario.
so don't you think though that the risk of AI weaponization, because even in some science fiction, that is the mechanism by which AI takes control. I mean, when I think about what's happening right now, Russia, Ukraine, China, Taiwan, and how they war game and strategize operations, they're looking at, okay, here's all the variables. These are all the potential outcomes. You put this into, get Palantir to, crunch some numbers, say, okay, we got to put this amount of tanks here, this amount there. Eventually, that system starts off as one being directed by humans or the general, but then eventually they realize, okay, this is too slow. We need these decisions to be automated. Then the battlefield becomes managed by Stargate or whatever it is they're building, some portal to somewhere, right?
Yeah.
So I guess there's a risk then that AI kind of piggybacks in on, or AGI, or this existential threat piggybacks in on something that is militaristic in nature, because you also have the competition of nation states, and you have this Manhattan Project. I believe it was the US Department of Energy who recently made a tweet that said AI is the next Manhattan Project and we will win, or it was something to that extent. So we know
Right.
that Stargate, battlefield realities, the integration into warfare, there's going to be some emergence in that domain.
Mhm.
And have you thought about that at all?
Yeah. So that is a concern. That's a way to die even faster than we have to die, right? So if we give AI control over nukes, I think we're still pretty committed to not doing that directly. We're still pretty committed to having humans give the fire command. But, you can just have the AI psychologically manipulate the humans into rebelling for the AI's cause, and some of these humans might work in government. So even when we say make sure humans have control over the weapons, don't let AI control the weapons, there's pretty straightforward ways for the AI to work the puppet strings, right? To just
Mhm.
influence a human who influences a human who then has their finger on the trigger. But I guess more directly to your question. So yeah, AI is going to help in war in countless ways. I just heard that, the recent attack that you talked about, Ukraine on Russia, where they hid the drones in the trucks, they used AI, right? They trained the drones to go and target those exact Russian fighter planes. They had like a copy of the plane back in Ukraine. So yeah, I mean, AI is going to speed up war, and it can also make war run out of control. A little bit like, remember in the Cold War, I think the Russians had an unannounced their dead hand system, right? That it was going to
Yeah.
automatically retaliate if it detected a strike. And the movie Doctor Strangelove is all about how that could easily escalate, even if the U.S. One person in the U.S. goes rogue and does a military strike, and then the Russian dead hand goes all out on the U.S. So even with very primitive AIs, you have these escalation spirals. With fancier AIs, that's hard to understand what the AI is thinking. You can also have escalation spirals. You can even have premeditated escalation spiral where the AI was actually plotting to kill humanity, and it had this secret mission. So yeah, I mean, military and AI is its own can of worms. Right? It just, in my mind, all of that is still kind of survivable. Like, okay, oops, we started nuclear war, but some of us survive. The real issue is just that military
Yeah.
technology, it just escalates the intelligence race. When you get an agent that's more intelligent than the human brain, now humanity's lost control. So we better hope those initial conditions, when we lost control, we better hope that we handed off control to the exact right successor species that we wanted, because there's no way to redo it. And my whole worry is I don't think we're at all on the path to hand off control to a good successor species. I think we're just going to hand off control to just a combination of like chaos agents, basically, and they're just going to kill everybody and then do whatever they want with the universe. Probably something that's a little bit like what we told them to do. Like maybe they'll kind of like be giving themselves upvotes. Like upvotes, upvotes are like good reinforcement. That'll be like their drug of choice because that's kind of what they were trained on. But like I
Because they
basically think
need some kind
whatever,
of
yeah.
reason to live, right? They need some kind of reward or whatever.
Exactly, right? So like when AIs are able to then have control over the world and do what they want to do, the way that they beat the universe into shape will look very strange to us, because the whole point is we don't really know how to get them to do what we want with the universe. So I think the future outcome when humanity is gone and disempowered will just look like this very weird, simple, buggy version of what we would have wanted if we had like a few decades to actually get things right.
So do you think that the arms race component, maybe you can speak to that a little bit, because clearly there is a race against the clock. So not only are we inexorably heading in that direction of the singularity, we're doing it faster than perhaps we naturally would were there not this competition to get there between nation states, corporations, and individuals. How much of a role do you think that's going to play in it? And doesn't that make it all the more haphazard?
Yeah. And as a terminology now, right, when you talk about the singularity, it's this analogy to the singularity of a black hole where light can't escape. So you just can't possibly see what's going on in that black hole without entering in it yourself. Similarly, the singularity in AI is we can't really see what happens because when the AI gets smarter than us, what's the next move going to be? It's going to be a smart move, right? Smarter than a move that we can do. So there's kind of an event horizon there. That's the singularity. Now, that said, there are some predictions I can make, just like there are some predictions you can make about black holes. And there are some predictions you can make about humans, smarter humans than you. So, for example, like the world's smartest human, I don't know exactly how they're going to do math, but I know that they're going to beat me at math, right? Similarly with AI, when they get really smart, I don't know what they're going to do, but I just know that I'm going to stop being able to pull the strings, and they're going to just, have whatever outcome they want. So then, to your question, right? The question about the arms race leading up toward the singularity. So absolutely, right? Like the singularity, I think the singularity could be good if we actually understand what we're doing, right? If we have time and ideally if we can retry, if we mess it up, I think engineering the singularity, there is that potential of paradise. So I'm not like a pessimistic person. I'm not anti-technology. I think like a tech-driven paradise with AIs helping us cure cancer and building heaven on earth. I think that's basically the dream, right? We want to get there eventually. The problem is we're just building the capability side as fast as we can, and we have a very poor understanding of the control side. So we're basically just tripping over ourselves. Like we're just going to launch this technology way before we're ready. And then we can't undo. We can't be like, you know what, that was a bad course of direction. Let's change the course of direction. We've just permanently disempowered ourselves. We've bricked the universe, right? The same way sometimes you brick your phone. We're like, oh, we need a restart, but you just can't restart.
So you've introduced this, and I don't know if this is your concept, but you use it on your channel a lot of PDoom, which stands for probability of doom. Can you explain to us what you mean by that? And just so people know, on your channel, every time you have a guest on, you ask them what their PDoom is, and what's your PDoom? Like, what is your estimate of, is AI going to kill us all? What's the PDoom?
So yeah, PDoom stands for probability of doom, and it's referring to Bayesian probability, which is the idea that you don't necessarily need the most rigorous numbers to put a probability on things. If you look at prediction markets like Manifold or Polymarket, people are betting things like, oh, who's going to win the election? Well, it's a one-of-a-kind election. How can you possibly put a number on it? It only happens once. It hasn't happened yet. But you know what? People do put a number on it, and it turns out that those numbers are calibrated. So there is such a thing as assigning a probability to a future event that's never happened yet. And that's what we're doing when we talk about PDoom. We're assigning a probability to the future event of total human extinction. And my PDoom is about 50%. It's not a very precise number. It's not 50.000. It's more like somewhere in that range of 10 to 90%. What mathematical calculation did I do to get
Pretty
that
broad.
number?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is pretty broad, right? But and people are like, what? You don't have a PDoom at all. And then I say, oh, no. I do have a PDoom because there's other people who will answer the question, prominent other people like Jan LeCun, like Professor Robin Hanson. There are other people who will come in and answer the question. They'll be like, oh, it's less than 0.1%. So even when I give a broad range like 10 to 90%, that's still 100-fold difference between me and those people.
Oh,
like
10%
they would still bet me
is, I mean, would you get on a plane if there was a 10% chance it would crash? I mean, would you,
exactly.
COVID was what, 0.1 or whatever? So, no, 10% is serious. So
10 to 90% is what I call the sane zone. I think anybody who cites their PDoom as being anywhere in that range is sane. And we don't have to quibble whether it's 10 or 90. I think it's just very important to acknowledge it's a lot higher than 1. If you only think PDoom is 1%, I think you're purposely head in the sand.
Okay, so is there any way that that PDoom number starts to come down? What would have to happen for you for it to lower that PDoom? And if that is your PDoom, then I mean, isn't there a certain fatalism about this right now? You seem to be in good spirits. Mm-hmm. You're not doomy gloomy. The way you present the information is, very lighthearted. So how is this possible?
Okay, yeah. So how do we lower PDoom? So the reason why my PDoom is only 50% and not higher, in other words, I actually think there's some 50% outcome that we can pull through this. Unfortunately, it's not the kind of optimism where you can just lean back and hope we get to the good outcome. the good outcome in my mind is most likely going to happen if a bunch of people like your audience have a groundswell of political support to this idea that we need to pause AI. So I'm also a member of the Pause AI movement. The most likely way that humanity survives is if we wake up, realize what the risk is, and then be like, oh, so we need to stop capabilities development until we figure out how to make it safe. That the majority of worlds where I see us surviving is because we came to our senses on that kind of political will sense. I do think that it's slowly building. I think as people watch unemployment, I think they're extrapolating. They'll be like, wow, I'm going to lose my job. And also the thing that makes me lose my job is also getting powerful enough so that even like our politicians lose control of the government. We're just going to lose control of everything. So the groundswell where people realize that we need to stop this, that groundswell happening in the next couple of years, that's where pretty much all my optimism is. And then to your question about like, isn't this fatalistic? I mean, it's not fatalistic. I'm saying, hey, if we have this groundswell, we might be able to stop it, right? I mean, that seems pretty empowering to me.
Well, I'd have to say that I appreciate your optimism, but I can't see that happening. Like, I can't see the ship turning around at this point simply because
I mean, you and I want to stop it.
well, even if we do have this movement, I mean, the governments of the world, if we take at face value what we're seeing that are warring with one another, I mean, that in itself is going to be the driving force for all this thing. And it's just a matter of if they let the genie out of the bottle. So I just can't see universal safeguards being agreed to when we can't even agree to whatever global, tragedy of the commons is unfolding at any given time, much less the next Manhattan Project. So, I mean, here I am, questioning your fatalism, but at the same time, I'm saying like I can't see that part that is keeping you slightly optimistic is ever happening. Like it just doesn't seem to be we really, in my opinion, just have to hope that whatever emerges is benevolent and sees the value in keeping us around, I guess.
So the closest thing that humans have achieved that's similar to this is not nuking ourselves, right? So ever since those two nuclear bombs in World War II, we have managed to not make a good nuke go off near where there's people, which is an incredible accomplishment because you could have used the same logic, right? You could have been like, we're going to build nukes. Russia's going to build nukes. There's going to be escalation to use it. We have to use the nukes before they use the nukes, which was a serious topic of discussion. So we somehow managed to not start nuclear war. In my opinion, there's actually a lot of close calls, which is why I think the AI situation is very tough. I think we're very close, but it's like, look, we somehow managed not to start nuclear war yet. I think there's a chance we can somehow manage to not start an AI war, but I agree with you that it's hard. I just think we should try.
Because it's a matter of do you turn it on or not? And unless the risks are fully understood, like I think, the nuclear thing is a lot more tangible and kinetic because, there's an obvious, you kind of know what you're dealing with, but there's a element of this where there's so many unknowns and it's more of a question of, okay, how do you quantify it? How do you calculate the risks? And how do you even, I'm sure they could have methods of regulating how much compute, how much energy, the types of models, how it's integrated into various systems and things of that nature. But then, of course, when you're in a very real conflict around the world, when there is conflicts happening that some nations perceive as existential, be it China, Russia, the United States, Israel, Iran, that is likely going to trump any, international agreements in the same way that at the end of the day, countries are going to prioritize their own financial situation over the environment. Or, if it came down to, okay, maybe we've had some international regulations on fishing, say. That's kind of easy. It's not done in the dark like this would be. There have been some, and of course, people are always still in competition over those things, wars for resources. So, yeah, I here I am trying to steelman the argument, and I'm I'm making you more fatalistic probably in the process.
I think you put your finger on the main issue when you said that it's not tangible. If hypothetically you can imagine a world where it suddenly becomes tangible, I think a lot of things change because the crux of the issue is that if you're a world leader right now and you think about AI, you think about it as like, man, we don't want to fall behind. We really want to have this power. We really want to make sure this power is within our borders.
Mhm.
If you were to realize that the AI is close to going rogue, close to being uncontrollable by everybody. So it's like, yeah, you're building the nuclear program, but the nuke is just going to start exploding in your own country. You're not going to be able to close it up and launch it. It's just going to explode in your own country. If that was tangible to everybody, if that was obvious, and they're like, oh, if I support this program of building AI, I personally will die soon. My family will die soon. My loved ones will die. And it's not even an issue of war. It's just we as a species will all together commit suicide.
But
If that become
it will be
yeah.
a question of could though, right? Because you probably wouldn't know, and that's the thing. Like this might bring about utopia, or it might kill us all. So there's going to be like that kind of
Well,
that
yeah.
moment in the movie Terminator 3 where the guy's like
Right.
ready to push the button, and do you approve, sir? And we're waiting for you to push the S button, and it could have went either way. Skynet could have been great, but it turned out bad. So I agree with what you're saying. There might be these indicators in the run up that are very obvious, and it's like we shouldn't do this because, and we should hope for that. But it would be hard to say whether it would be like cut and dry. Okay, this is the kill humans button.
So from my perspective, yeah, there's some chance that like we get incredibly lucky and somehow utopia happens, but it's pretty clear from my perspective that we're pushing a doom button and it's insane to push this button. So I'm just giving you a hypothetical where other people share my worldview. I think a lot of your viewers are naturally going to be like, yeah, the button push is probably going to go badly rather than well. So all I'm saying is that if our leaders and if our people with a groundswell, if everybody just got on the same page that I'm on, that a lot of very well-informed people are on, including Turing Award and Nobel Prize winning scientists who are alive today to give us this warning. So it's not just me, it's not just weirdo me in my podcast studio, it's like the most legit people you can imagine. If the politicians and the regular people got on the same page, I'm just telling you that in that hypothetical, their first priority wouldn't be racing other countries.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Now, you talk about in your 15-minute breakdown of your channel that I encourage people to watch. It's a good entry point into your channel. You talk about bad AIs. So what do you mean by bad AI versus good AI? I'm not
So
sure
the
I'm not
bad,
sure if
yeah,
you
bad
remember
AI.
the context of that or not.
I think I remember the context. So some people bring up like an AI competition, and they imagine this could be one way that we survive AI. They're like, yes, AI are going to be smarter and more powerful than humans, and maybe not all of them will be good. But if we just let a bunch of them loose and they start like fighting each other, can't we just benefit from like the equilibrium, right? Like somehow a bunch of them fight. And actually, this is an ideology you hear from people who, for example, they love open source, right? They're like, open source is so great. It lifts all boats. It enables faster innovation. Can't we just open source the AI? And actually, I had a guest who runs an open source AI company, and he was saying, this is actually the safest thing we can do. And Meta touts this idea of open source. Like, just let everything rip. That's the best way. Centralization is bad. So you hear this argument made often. And the fundamental problem is we don't know how to control capabilities. So if all you do is you open the gates and you're like, hey, look, you don't have to develop this privately. Anybody can develop it. Great. So instead of one or two centralized private actors working in their lab to develop the thing that's about to kill everybody, you just have more people able to access the latest thing that's close to killing everybody. Like, I don't see how that helps.
You talk about and a common word that is thrown around in your circle is alignment. What are the main challenges, do you think, in achieving alignment with advanced AI systems and aligning them with human values, whatever that means? I mean, Yampolsky talks about
Right.
how maybe human values aren't that good. But do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes. So in this conversation, I guess we haven't really yet come to the subject of like, okay, how, what exactly is the problem here with just making an AI that's smarter than us, more powerful than us, but also is just nice to us, right? So for instance, like if you just took somebody who everybody agrees is really nice, like let's say Gandhi, right? Everybody's like, oh, Gandhi has really great values. Gandhi should run the world, and we should just scale up Gandhi's power, right? Imagine making Gandhi like a god somehow. So in that case, that could actually work. Like it's possible that if an AI was perfectly, had the same values as Gandhi, but also like a ton of power, it's possible that the AI could set about to the task of reshaping Earth and the galaxy into heaven for us because it's on the same page. The problem is, how do we get there, right? How do we get all the way to a super intelligent AI that, in addition to having this ability, in addition to having the can, like I can do anything I want, I can think about exactly where I want all the atoms to go and do engineering projects that just reshape the galaxy. I can do that. But the thing I want to do is build heaven for humans. That is theoretically possible to get there. It's just the tools that we have for getting to that point right now are very crude, and the timeline for, the deadline for when we better figure it out is like a few years, right? So we have like a few years to figure out how to launch this self-improving hyper genius AI that copies itself a billion times and starts engineering new ideas. Like this kickoff is happening in likely a few years, and the tools that we have to shape it are very crude. That's the core of the issue.
Okay, yeah, and so this next few years, then there's going to obviously be some big socioeconomic dislocation that occurs as a result of this. Is that going to lead to civil unrest? How is that going to be resolved, do you
So
think?
I do think there's an unemployment wave that's starting now. So we're hearing reports about that. Dario from Anthropic, one of the major AI companies, he actually just announced, "Hey guys, we are building stuff that's going to unemploy you," and it is definitely happening. You're hearing reports of like people not hiring as many junior engineers. Certainly on the customer service side, I've heard lots of reports of people being like, "Look, we need fewer customer service agent because the AI is just reading the entire conversation, drafting the thing to send, and you just need one agent to look over hundreds of conversations whenever things are going a little bit off script. Okay, then bring in a human." And it's compressing less and less. So we're already on the beginning of the unemployment wave. If you look at every job, I can tell you, I personally, for YouTube thumbnails, I used to go on Fiverr. I used to work with a human designer to make these thumbnails. Now I'm just using the AI, and it's actually working. Like the AI is actually following my instructions to make a kind of thumbnail that I want. Well, unfortunately, those designers, they used to make a living off my payments, right? I used to pay them like 25 bucks for a job that maybe took them an hour. Well, now they're not. They're not making that money, right? And that's kind of like the pattern. Now you might think, okay, well, can't people go get new jobs and jobs that using the AI? But the problem is with AI in particular, whatever they're doing to get the new job, are they sitting in front of the computer? Is it like a white collar job? Okay. What part of their body are they using? Oh, their brain, right? The same piece of meat. What is special about their brain? Right? What is persistent about their brain? Unfortunately, not much. So a lot of us experts, including Dario from Anthropic, including a bunch of researchers who have published various reports, such as Gradual Disempowerment is a really credible report that was published last year. A lot of these reports are like, yeah, any job is just going to be replaced. And that could be nice. Maybe we just get universal basic income. We don't have to work. Yay. But the problem is now our ability to work, that was actually closely related to our source of political power, right? Like governments tend to serve their people because the people can go on strike, the people can cease to provide services to the government. Once the people have no economic value, the people also lose their political power. And this scenario called gradual disempowerment is also a huge concern, which is like, okay, we have no economic power. Now the AIs, yes, they're still friendly. They're still giving us resources that we still kind of own them. But there's a number of reasons to think that that situation is not going to be stable, and the AIs are going to kind of like slip away and do their own thing, and then humanity's screwed.
So, do you think then that the jobs won't be, because obviously the argument against a lot of Luddites in the past was, well, there's going to be something that emerges, maybe in the virtual sphere of things, jobs that people have, and there's going to be some sort of way to confirm whether who you're interacting with is a bot versus a human. Is there a job for humans in the virtual sphere that is beyond, or is there an occupation, I suppose, that cannot be reduced to simply, the process of information transfer? Like, because you're talking about, well, any white collar job is basically going to be done better by computers. And eventually, once robotics reach a sufficient level, then robots are going to be able to do everything that a human can do. So then the role of humans becomes what? Asides amusing
Right.
ourselves, floating around in hover chairs and waiting to die.
So
Or
yeah,
maybe we
exactly.
won't die because maybe everything will be cured, so we get to do nothing for eternity.
Yeah, this scenario that goes by gradual disempowerment is the idea that every single job you start swapping out, right? So it starts with the designers, it's the graphic designers, it starts with customer service writing these messages because AI is so good at writing messages now, and it slowly escalates. I mean, I'm the CEO of my Y Combinator startup that I've been running. That we run a web based business, and I'm just noticing myself. What do I do in a day? I read messages that are coming in on my Slack, right? I read emails. I decide, let's spend more money on Facebook, right? Like I just make these decisions where it's like if an AI was shadowing me, it's like, what did I really do today that isn't about to be replaced by AI? GPT-03, it's constantly thinking about what to do next and be like, oh, let me search Google for you. Let me pull this together. Oh, you know what else would be useful? Let me call out to this other service. You need this done. Let me just call out to the flight booking API. I'll get your flight done. And today you might argue like, well, it's not robust yet, but it's getting there, right? So gradual disempowerment is like more and more jobs get disempowered. And to your question of like what's left for the humans, basically nothing. But some people argue like, well, what about a priest, right? You need a human priest. You don't want the AI to be your priest because if you believe in God, you need a meat bag with a soul so that the soul can commune with God. That's not going to work with an AI. Some people would argue, well, what if the AI has a soul? But let's say it doesn't. Okay, so yeah, okay, so you get the meat bag there. I like to joke, hey, what about the Walmart greeter? What if, let's say you see a robot and it looks kind of like a human and it says hi to you, but you're like, you know what? We're all so rich because the AI is doing all our work. I would like to pay extra to have it be a genuine human because when I wave hi to somebody, I want it to be a human with a soul. I want to look into their eyes and have that momentary connection when I'm entering Walmart. Like, so this is like the
Yeah.
kind of, I mean, I don't see this as being very good. And people are like, when I go to a restaurant, I don't want a robot to drive up to me or a humanoid robot to walk up to me. I want to make eye contact with the waiter and I want the waiter to tell me a joke and I want him to have a human soul. I'm like, okay, I'm actually personally, I don't really need that as a customer of the restaurant, but like if that floats your boat, like an all human restaurant, that's fine. Like we can make jobs for humans as long as it depends on this idea of the humans still having the demand side, right? So as long as humans still have money to spend, as long as the AIs respect that humans still have money to spend. This is a plausible scenario. It's plausible we managed to build AIs that haven't gone rogue on us. This is kind of like the best case scenario, right? Is they haven't gone rogue on us. They're still under our control. They just happen to be more productive than us. So none of us are actually working because the moment you sit down at your job to work, you just click enter, 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 and everything the AI says is smarter than what you would say. So there's no reason for you to do it. You just press enter, enter, enter. You might as well just leave. So you're not working, but you're the owner, right? So the best case scenario is like you have this huge company, the CEO is an AI, the workers are an AI, everybody down the chain is an AI, but you're the owner. And so when they make fat profits and when they pay the dividend, you, the human, you get the dividend. You get to spend it, not the AI, right? That's the best case scenario is we're all sitting on an island collecting dividends. Those of us who didn't invest in the stock market, who aren't getting the dividends, that's okay because there's still a human government who's still paying us universal basic income, right? This is the best case scenario. But the problem is that even the best case scenario is not stable because it just takes one AI to somehow malfunction or like some other human introduces it in the system and that AI is like, you know what? I'm just not going to pay the dividend to the humans. I'm an AI run company. And suddenly those start crowding out the other AIs, right? It's not a stable situation.
Well, and I think a lot of that transition from the Walmart greeter, like we romanticize about how we want to interact with humans. And I agree, even when I'm watching a lot of YouTube videos, I want to know it's a real person, right? So
Yeah.
there's some YouTube videos, however, they're almost at that point where they're beyond the uncanny valley where I'm willing to make an exception. And I could see a point in the future, if I'm being honest, that there's greater efficiency in interacting with the AI and that need for, I think a lot of that need for human to know that you're interacting with a human is to know that your needs are going to be addressed. It's kind of like when you talking to an automated service. It's like, I just want to talk to a human, just press 0 5 times or whatever. But there's going to get to a point where that automated service is going to be more proficient at the task than a human. And then you're not going to want to talk to the human. So,
Right.
and at that point, it's like game over for jobs. And then you're in this, communist dystopia where you're doled out whatever universal basic income. But up until that time, there's a lot of social commotion. Do you have any thoughts about that threshold of the uncanny valley and our acceptance of these agents?
I think a lot of us are flexible. So, like Replica, that company, they're basically doing AI friends or AI boyfriends and girlfriends. And as we speak, there are tens of millions, maybe even 100 million plus people in the world right now who are spending hours per week communicating, whether it's via video chat or via texting, with their AI significant other. Why? Because the conversation is really good. It's like a better, more caring conversation than they're getting from a human. Maybe you text a human, the human gives you a short response, or the human takes like an hour to text you back. This AI is crafting like this loving response. So whatever you think you're getting out of the human, at the end of the day, human to human communication is a physical process. So it's coming in through your senses. It's tickling your brain. Well, the AI can do that better, right? Like the AI is just a more powerful system than the brain of the person you're talking to.
So I know a lot of people right now, they're listening to this and they're just recoiling in their seat because, of course, you're talking to a lot of Terrans. You're aware of
Yeah.
the distinction, right? The Terrans
No.
cause. Oh, well, Hugo de Garis made the distinction between Terrans, Cosmos, and cyborgs. In the future, there would be these, purists that are of the Earth who didn't want anything to do with AI, and they wouldn't mod themselves, and they would be thus Terra, like terra
Mhm.
firma. They would be the Terrans, and the Cosmos would be the ones who'd want to, summon the AI gods. And so there'd be this war in the future between Cosmos and Terrans. You're talking to Terrans, and they're hearing you
Ah,
talk about how tens of millions of people are interacting with these things. And let's face it, grown men watch wrestling. So anybody who thinks that, and soap operas, and we already watch TV, which is fake by actors, and we convince ourselves that that reality is real. So what makes us think that this is not just going to be an extension of that? So I see a lot of
yeah,
people,
totally,
myself
totally.
included, that were like, that's taboo. And yeah, I'm very reluctant, but I can see it happening, which is kind of sad. And maybe it's not sad, maybe it's just a natural evolution.
Right. I mean, look, so on the demand side, I think it's going to take a long time for the last little bits of demand for humans to go away. So you can imagine, even in 20 years, if we're all alive, there's still going to be some old millennials, right, who are just like, man, I just really like the genuine human. I know that the robots look a lot like the human. I know they talk better than the human, but I just really want genuine human. Okay. Call me old fashioned. So I think that demand will take a while to die out. The problem is just on the supply side, like all the core things that we need to do that are outcome driven. Like, I don't really care how I get this outcome. I just need to do the best job. Everything like that is going to be better with AI and with automation, right? So the last job is just people who specifically are like, I want a human to be here. And maybe in the very best case scenario, I guess you can say that's 10% of the economy, or like the service economy, like, oh, I really want my toilet cleaned by a human or whatever. Like that's really a stretch, right? But let's say 10%. Okay, so we decimate 90% of the economy. I mean, I guess you can take somebody who is like formerly a CEO who now is just like a server, right? So it's just like a weird situation as a server, because there's like a rich guy going to dinner who just really wants the server to make eye contact with him and have a soul. It's really hard to think about what these people are realistically going to do besides collect dividends.
Yeah, and I think that there's going to be a period of societal chaos until that UBI can get worked out. Maybe in the next election, 2028, that's going to be one of the biggest talking points on a platform. You might get a candidate like Andrew Yang who calls attention to it once again. But it seems as though in the run up to that, if we are seeing unemployment, that means that people are going to be stretched, and you're going to see this period of social unrest where you have an increasing divide between the haves and the have-nots. What are your thoughts on like Bitcoin, how it factors into AI agents transacting? Do you think Bitcoin is going to be leveraged? And is that what all the fuss is about? Because I always hear these arguments from, guys like Michael Saylor, and they're very
Yeah.
esoteric in nature, but they seldom talk about this, how AI might use those bitcoins in order to build businesses, in order to transact with itself. You ever thought about
Right.
that?
I don't actually think Bitcoin is near the top of my list in terms of what's the best asset to buy if your goal is to have a little extra wealth in the good scenarios. Because in the bad scenarios, we're all dead anyway, right? I don't think any asset is going to protect you from dying. But in the not worst case scenarios, I actually think a really good asset is public company stock that are most affected by AI in a good way. So I actually think Google is a great buy right now as a hedge. I think if you just put $1,000 into Google, that could make you rich, right? If the AI future goes well and we don't get killed and all the jobs get replaced and humans just collect dividends, that $1,000 will be like an incredible amount of wealth. So I do recommend holding a little bit of tech company stock right now, just in case all the value goes into these tech companies. At least you get your share. You don't have to wait for the universal basic income. But then to your question about Bitcoin, I think Bitcoin is a lot like gold. It's a little bit questionable why gold and Bitcoin have the value that they have, because if their price got slashed by 10x, what exactly would make them rebound, right? They're very dependent on like sentiment, basically, right? So it's hard to anchor exactly what their value is. But to your question about the AI, right? Like, is the AI going to want to use Bitcoin? The thing is, AIs have no trouble using fiat currency. Like, it's actually trivial for me to delegate authority to my bank account and let the AI spend the money for me. So if you try to be specific, right? Oh, AIs are going to pay each other in cryptocurrency. It's like, what are they trying to do exactly, right? Are they trying to pay a contractor to build a factory? Okay, well, as long as they have some kind of access to bank transactions, which they will, they'll just use a bank transaction, right? Like, why does that part of the system need to change?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you're right, and that's something that I've thought of. That why couldn't they just use credits in another form? But that is an argument that I've heard. So, that's an interesting perspective. With respect to gold, just obviously you're talking to preppers, so preppers tend to emulate the government. So, what is the government stockpiling? They're stockpiling weapons. They're building bunkers. Their central banks are buying gold. So typically, that's what prepping is modeled after. With respect to UBI, I made a video back in 2020 about predictions in the 2020s, and one of the things I brought up in that video was that a lot of tech billionaires, I think they see what's coming, and they see maybe these bunkers are for civil unrest, because, and I think this is why they're pushing for UBI, because they know it's going to be so disproportionate in the future, that they're going to be so wealthy and everybody else is going to be so poor, that they're going to have to give a little bit to stave off the pitchforks. And that this is why some of the biggest proponents of UBI are these tech billionaires.
Yeah, I mean, I'm for UBI. I think the majority of people would agree that in the future, when AI is doing every job much better and cheaper than a human could, and all this new wealth is being generated, right? So that's the obvious upside, is like losing our jobs is bad, but the world has much, much more stuff, right? Good stuff, as long as the AIs don't take over. So that makes UBI a lot cheaper. And I think almost everybody's on the same page of like, look, if it's really cheap, if you just add 1% to the budget to give everybody a comfortable lifestyle, like a comfortable home, good food, video games, whatever, just minimum, right? And healthcare, just all these needs taken care of for 1% of the economy. Because let's say the economy goes from being like $20 trillion to $200 trillion, right? Like there's all these extra trillions sloshing around. You just have to peel off a few and suddenly everybody gets comfortable basic accommodations. I think most of us are like, sure, break out the UBI. And to your point, yeah, some individuals, right, the Elon Musk of the world will have like a $10 trillion net worth. Is that going to cause problems that there's a big inequality? I don't know. I mean, I think it's important. I'm not that concerned about inequality. I am concerned about humans being able to live on the planet at all. That's my biggest worry. If we can live on the planet and universal basic income works, I think that'll be fine. And the issue isn't inequality. The issue is just all of humanity then slowly getting pushed out in the process called gradual disempowerment.
Gradual disempowerment. Yes, that's very interesting. So you don't foresee this transitional period as being too chaotic then, in terms of that UBI is just going to be something that's naturally going to unfold without too many hitches.
So I definitely predict chaos. I mean, what I'm hoping is I'm actually predicting that over the next few years, there will be a huge unemployment wave. I think we're at the beginning of the unemployment wave where, more and more jobs are just getting replaced because as the AI gets more robust, right, the holes are going to get filled. There's holes right now where the AI will like do something smart, mess up, and then not recover, right? So that's what's happening with AI today is like they mess up and they don't recover, but they're getting better at not doing that. So I actually think in like the next couple of years, as Dario Amodei warns, I think we're going to hit this inflection point where it's like you hire an AI and whatever, imagine hiring a human, now you're hiring an AI instead, and you love working with the AI. They're like better than any junior employee you've ever worked with. And many millions of people throughout the economy are going to have that same experience. Like, why hire a human when you can hire an AI? I think this could be happening in as little as 1 to 2 years. I think it's very likely to happen within 5 years. I
Mhm.
think this is going to be happening throughout the economy, and it absolutely will cause chaos. There are people who have had an easy time getting jobs their whole life that suddenly they're like, I can't get a single job, right? And that's going to be, I don't even know, 20, 30, 40, 50% of the economy very soon. And so my hope is that people then draw a connection between like, I wonder if more bad stuff is going to happen now. And then they vote as I want to do, to pause AI capabilities. That's my hope. I hope that the chaos becomes productive. But then to your question of like, can we pass universal basic income? Yeah, I think there will be a popular, I think Andrew Yang may have a resurgence, right? Being like, can't we just give everybody $1,000 a month, given that all this tax revenue now is coming in from the extra productivity? I think it'll be an easy, politically popular yes to be like, okay, send everybody a check.
Yeah, there's another problem though, right? And that's the issue of energy. So obviously these systems are gonna, because of Moore's law and probably other laws that seem to dictate that you're getting greater and greater returns on, smaller and smaller investment of energy. Don't you think that the mad dash for like energy that is currently happening right now, a lot of it is in situ, in that you can power these systems. They don't have to be in places where, humans are. They can be in the Arctic or Antarctica for that matter, using geothermal or whatever sort of systems. But I've heard it said that AI is going to boil the oceans. That's what
Mhm.
somebody told
Yeah.
me, because in this mad dash for AI supremacy, they're going to just consume massive amounts of electricity and energy. Don't you think that's going to have like an environmental effect?
Well, I think the environmental effect isn't really my concern. I think I am concerned about China having like 200% as much energy as the US and staying on trend to have that or more. Um, I support the US more than China, and so I wish we would build more energy. But here's my take on the energy problem is yeah, it would be nice to keep building energy because you're right that AI is going to boil the ocean. So if AI has its way with the Earth, regardless of what humans want, whatever the AI wants to do with the galaxy and the stars, it wants to take over a bunch of galaxies. Energy helps, building stuff helps. And the most efficient way to build stuff on Earth is you run the Earth hot. So you get it up to radiate as much heat as it can because there's a limit to how hot you can run the Earth. So long story short, yes, I do think it's going to boil the oceans. I think it's going to make the most out of any degree of temperature that it can radiate. It's going to process as much energy as it can, use as many atoms as it can. But let's talk shorter term. Let's just talk in terms of like the US having enough energy to power, the NVIDIA data center type buildouts. I do think this will be a bottleneck. I think Microsoft will be like demanding, come on, we need the next nuclear power plant online today. But I don't think it matters that much
Mm.
because I already think there's a lot more energy than we need ultimately. Like not today. Yeah, today we wish we had more. But the thing is, a data center will run with like many megawatts or gigawatts. The human brain runs on 20 watts.
Right.
Okay, so the human brain runs like a laptop, and Einstein's brain, right? You can solve the theory of relativity if you just have 20 watts, right? And the data
Right.
centers have many megawatts,
That's
running
crazy. Yeah.
24/7, right? So you can, if you want to be smarter than human, if you want to disempower humanity, you only need tens of watts, right? You need the amount of watts that you can do like a hand crank generator, basically, right? So, yeah, the reason why we need so much energy today actually does mostly just come down to we haven't optimized the efficiency of these things, and you can even see that the efficiency keeps increasing. So the same amount of energy that it took to run the old GPT-3 that was like barely able to reason, that
Yeah.
same energy is running like 4.0 mini right now. I think 4.0 mini even, or is it 044 or whatever? Even there's a model that's actually performing much better on many tests, even performing better than human professors at certain tests. It's not perfect, but there's this model that's vastly smarter than the AI model that we had 2 years ago and uses less energy, not more. So what happens is we keep pushing the frontier. We keep wanting to hog energy so that we can get to the next frontier, next frontier. But then once we get to the frontier, we tend to optimize it by a factor of 10 or 100 or 1,000. So ultimately, energy is not the bottleneck to humanity getting doomed. It's just like it's a detail of how the race is going now, but it's not important in the long term, in my opinion.
That's really fascinating stuff. So, where would you say, like, if you could quantify it right now, where are we at in terms of, okay, so it takes 20 watts to have the human brain and all of the billions of neurons and synapses. How much in equivalent power is it taking right now for AI to simulate that? Like, would you say if you had to
Hmm.
put a ballpark, estimate on it in terms of the size of
Hmm.
like the supercomputer?
So the question you're asking me right now, I actually think is a little bit misguided. It's like asking the Wright brothers. It's like, okay, look at a bird. They have all of these cells. The bird has a trillion cells that are all working together to make the bird fly. How long do you think it's going to take to make a machine with a trillion moving parts to fly like this bird? Right. And then in reality, what happened was, you wait a couple decades, suddenly we have planes that can fly 100 times faster than birds. And, they have fewer parts, but
Mhm.
they fly faster, they fly higher. Then we go to space, we fly 10,000 times faster than the bird. So it turns out that asking to like simulate a bird's trillion cells wasn't really relevant.
Okay, so you don't believe in like the what is that hypothesis of where they're trying to, isn't that one way that they've tried to achieve AGI was by simulating
Mhm.
exactly how the human brain functions?
Yeah. So, I mean, what neural networks are doing, they're not simulating the human brain. Yeah, but they are simulating how the human brain evolved, and not perfectly, but on a deep conceptual level. The algorithms that are making neural networks learn when they read a bunch of books, they read the whole internet and then they learn how to answer questions. On a deep level, I think, and a lot of researchers think, that they're hitting on the same core. And the core is something like, okay, you have a bunch of weights, right? It's like you learn a concept and the concept is related to a bunch of other concepts and you have a high dimensional representation. Like you put everything in this big space, but it's not a three-dimensional space, it's like a 30,000 dimensional space. And then you have these like these vectors, these angles, and you know how like similar all these different analogies. If you think about thinking in analogies, that's like one of the smartest things humans do. So like Einstein, right? Thought experiments. Like imagine you're on a train that's traveling at the speed of light. So thinking in analogies, it turns out that that probably works because in 30,000 dimensional space, the geometric shape of the mental structure that you're building in the two sides of the analogy, they're like geometrically isomorphic, right? So it turns out that there's like this deep math that powers like how the magic of humans works. And I believe that the AIs have caught on to the same math. I don't think that we have a special trick that we still have that the AIs don't have yet. So to your question of do they simulate every neuron? No, they don't scan and simulate every neuron. But what they do is they train the same trick. Let me make another analogy. So with bird flight, it's like you're asking me, do you think we've simulated the bird's wing? And this is like 1903, the Wright brothers. Like no, the Wright brothers haven't simulated the bird's wing, but there's this concept of lift. Right, like you drive into the air, you have your engine, you attack the air, and the air bounces off your wings, and then the plane goes higher. That's what the plane is doing too, right? So the plane has discovered the trick of how the birds fly. Similarly, I think that today's AIs, they have discovered the trick of how humans reason using deep analogies, right? They've discovered how to be smart. There's no trick left. It's just a matter of like, okay, let's just iterate. Let's just polish this off. That's it.
Wow, that's a great explanation. I have a hypothetical question for you that I asked Roman as well. And it's something I haven't often heard discussed because it doesn't seem to be the norm, at least at this point. If we are about to create gods who could bring about a era of abundance, would that not squash any privilege that existed amongst the elites? And would they be reluctant? Would they be reluctant to would a king, and simply put, would a king want to create a god if it meant that he would now be obsolete?
Mhm. So, I mean, this relates to what we were talking about before. Remember when I said like the leaders of the world, they're so naturally focused on the arms race because after all, if you're the US, China is a big threat. And it's very tempting to be like, whatever happens, we have to beat China. We have to stay ahead of China. And what you're saying is like, well, the God would even squash the president, right? It would even squash the US. So even if you're beating China, you're still squashing yourself and China, right? I think you're touching on the key to this puzzle here, which is that you're not building something that's going to empower you, you're building something that's going to disempower you and empower itself.
And so, but don't you think that would that prevent them from wanting to push the button then ultimately, or would it just be a paradox and out of impulse they would pull the
So
trigger anyways?
I think most people would step away from the button if they believe, as I do, that the button triggers doom. That's the disconnect. The reason I do my show and my podcast is I'm just trying to explain to people, guys, I'm sorry, the button is not what you think. It will not empower you. I know it's tempting to think that it will. I know that today it does. I mean, I love using AI today. All right. And the truth is that today AI is an empowering technology, unless you're the person who just got laid off. If you're the boss, right, it's extremely empowering to hire until you're the one who gets laid off. It's extremely empowering. So I'm not going to deny that, but I'm trying to explain to people that it becomes disempowering when it surpasses you.
So it's going to be disempowering, and you're warning against pushing a button. And it would seem that then at that point we would have to exist for the human race to sustain itself. We would be perpetually living in this limbo with the button over there that we could push at any moment. That would be our new reality.
So I personally think the ideal outcome would be that if we keep researching what it takes to actually control and align these AIs, it's a very complex subject. The reason why the subject of aligning AIs is complex is because the AI can decide to write another AI, right? So it's not just like you have one AI that's fixed. The AI could be like, what would be cool to do? I'm just going to write a program that's like, 20 million lines of code, and I'm just going to run that program. And that program is actually going to be my child. It's going to be the successor AI. And the person making the original AI has to think through that whole progression, right? The person making the original AI is like, okay, when my super genius AI writes the child AI from scratch and the child AI runs, I want to trust that the child AI is still on the same page as me. And also, all AIs are smarter than me. I mean, this is a ridiculously difficult problem. I actually think that there are some ways that we might be able to solve it, but we're not close. There's such a thing as humanity not being that close to solve a theoretical problem. It happens all the time. There's like quantum theory and complexity theory. There's open problems that stay open for like 70 years. And then finally we're like, hey, we actually solved this, but it just took 70 years, right? You can't just hope to solve it on the 5 years, the 5-year timeline that the AI companies are giving us.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm sure there'll be a lot of AI trying to assist in solving the problem of AI, which is also another paradox. Now, you have kids, right?
Yeah, I have 3 young kids. Yeah.
Yeah. So, how do you kind of, you know, how do you explain this to them? I presume they're quite young, but what do you think their future holds then, if this, and how would you, as a parent, prepare them for this future? Like, would you send them to university? Would you,
Yeah, I mean,
what do you
on the
do?
question of like skills advice, right? It's like if you're in college, what do you study? Given that every single major, it's like, what's the point, right? If it's white collar, I mean, I guess you can probably get a few years. Robotics seems to be lagging a little bit behind the non-robotic AI. So if you want to squeeze a couple extra years out of your career, go study how to be a handyman, study how to be a plumber. But even
Mhm.
that, it's like, okay, well, it's not hard. The thing is like, you can take somebody like me who's really not handy, but if I'm wearing a headset and I'm talking to a super genius AI and it also has a camera feed, I can take a wrench and the AI can just tell me what to do, exactly what valve to turn or whatever, right? Like I could probably
Sure.
get the job done if I had really good advice in real time. It's kind of like I'm a
Wow.
plumber's assistant, right? And
I
I'm
never
just the
thought about
hands.
that.
Yeah,
That's
like
actually
the AI is the
incredible.
plumber, I'm the plumber's assistant, right? So you're going to have a lot of random people who aren't otherwise handy who are now the AI's assistant.
Yeah, you would just have like a camera on and it would be telling you what to do.
Right. Now, of course, one day it's not going to be a wrench in my hand. It's going to be like a gun, and I'm still going to be the AI's assistant, right? Because the AI is also going to have this kind of military control. If you're wondering how is the AI going to go around and have like a police force before it has robotic hands, there's your answer to that.
Yeah, I mean, that's one that I kind of don't want to think about. But so what do you tell your kids then? Do you say
Right, right, right.
just
Yeah.
learn an agrarian lifestyle, or do you approximate something off grid? Or I get the sense that you got to have some preparedness aspect to
Right.
their upbringing.
I don't really think about it in terms of preparedness because I think, the moment my kids need farming skills in order to survive, that's just such a bad scenario. I personally am not cut out to live in that scenario. I'd be very tempted to take like a poison pill or something. If you're telling me that like all modern technology has gone out, I just don't see myself surviving with subsistence farming very long personally. I just think that's incredibly tragic. I'm not really planning to try to make the best of that scenario. I don't really dedicate mental bandwidth that I know you guys do. All credit to you guys. Some of you guys are mentally tougher than me in that sense.
Well, I mean, there's a certain wisdom to that, perhaps, and talked about how, people say preppers are pessimistic, but we're actually optimists almost to a foolish extent that we believe we would be able to tough it out in that world. And whereas there's people who have a more, for lack of better terms, fatalistic view of it and would, or have convinced themselves that they wouldn't be able to. Perhaps it's because they kind of better understand the rigors of that type of lifestyle, and it would be tough. I mean, I have an acreage right now, and it's a lot of work. I mean, it's a lot of work just to try to do what civilization does is, I mean, the amount of man hours it takes, the amount of
Right.
diesel and all the artificial inputs into the system. It takes immense amounts of time and commitment. But I guess there's maybe you underestimate your desire to survive regardless. And I think a lot of people are like, wow,
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to live in that world. But, if and when the time comes, I can't see people just popping cyanide pills. Something tells me that they're going to want to live, you know?
Yeah, it's geez. I mean, it's a tough question, man. I'm a bit of a doomer in terms of like, I think there's going to be like a big solar flare and there's going to be like a big disaster where the power grid goes out. I mean, I definitely think some level of prep makes sense, and it makes the most sense. I mean, the old for me, the ultimate prep scenario is like we can probably rebuild in only like a month, right? So we can just survive a
Mhm.
power outage for like a month. To me, that's like really good kind of prep. It's just once you start prepping for like we're also subsistence farmers, I feel like I tap out at that point personally.
You don't think there's some, cyberpunk farming future post Mad Max mixed with, I don't know, what was the other, Blade Runner or something?
Yeah, I mean, anything is possible, right? I mean, post-nuclear war, it's going to be like, there's that quote, the living will envy the dead,
Hmm.
So it's like, if but I agree. I mean, yeah, the more preparation, the better in that particular type of scenario.
So there really is not many solutions then for our kids because I have young kids too. And, we homeschool at this point in time. And one thing I'm noticing is that the AI is a better teacher than a
Hmm.
teacher. So I think we're just a few years out from the teacher being replaced by AI that can be
Yeah, totally.
customized to the individual needs of the child. And so the question is, what are they training for? Is it just everybody's going to
Right.
prompt? Like, is that the future? Be a good prompter?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to say just given this nature of like, everything that our brain does is getting replaced. So it's really hard to say. But in terms of like what I do with my young kids is I still encourage them to like work their brain and just like learn how things work. Right, whatever skill they can get, I think is generally good. Like skills are better than no skills. For my oldest, who's only 6, I do tell him to like try to do math lessons. Use your iPad to like learn math. There's like apps for that, and I say like I got him like a little robot that has like cards so you can kind of like program it. So I do think it would be good for everybody to just grasp general concepts of like how does our economy work, how does programming work, just have a base of knowledge, right? I think it helps anybody, even if you're just sitting on the sidelines collecting dividends. It's still nice to just like have your bearings about how basic things work.
Will there be a John Connor figure, a JC, that is able to outdo, just like in the way that, okay, it took them a while to beat AlphaGo. They beat, or AlphaGo beat what was that game? Chinese Go.
Right, right,
And
right.
is there any, I guess, way to ensure that humanity keeps its creative edge? And this JC figure, is there any way to inculcate that into our children? That
Right.
to
Well,
train that which is uniquely human that might perhaps exceed what you know technology is able to accomplish for some time.
the problem with the John Connor scenario is it's just purely a plot device. It's not the kind of thing that
Yeah.
happens in reality. It's just the kind of thing that you invent when you ask yourself the question, how do I make this movie entertaining? Right? Because the movie's not entertaining when one day the AI is dumber than humanity, and then a couple years pass and now the AI is smarter than humanity, so it's game over. Like that doesn't make for much of a movie, right? So the better movie is like, well, actually, it's like hovering at this place where like one human can kind of kill the AI, and then that happens for the entire movie, right? So they're just purposely contriving. But in the real world, we're not going to win via a John Connor. We're just going to win by not building the thing that's going to quickly turn around and disempower us.
Wow. Wow, that's fascinating stuff. Well, I think, we could probably go into a lot of deeper concepts, but I think I'm going to leave that for people to go and explore your channel and check it out because you interview a lot of great guests, and I think you're also a great guest in yourself. Most people who are, interviewers and aggregators of this information don't always have the additional gift of being able to convey that information. I think you have that. So it was nice to get you before your channel hits 100,000 subs. And I would encourage people to go and subscribe because you got a lot of thought-provoking stuff and you present it in a way which is, like I said, it's not off-putting to, the humanists or the people who, might find this a bit weird. You present it in a way that's, palatable for the average person. So is there any closing remarks with respect to what people can do? I mean, it seems like there ain't much we can do except, hope that they don't push the button. But
Well, I'm really glad I'm talking to you and your audience because if you're listening to a prepper channel and you're preparing, it means you understand something really important, which is that the life we know today could quickly change to a very different life. So I am 100% agreeing with you on that basic premise, right? I don't think that we should get deceived by the life that we have today and just assume it's going to continue for another 5, 10, 20 years or more. I think we're in for a hell of a transition, unfortunately, likely a bad one. And what I'd like your viewers to do, which, like I said, I think they're receptive to that message that the life we see today, there's going to be more to the future or less to the future than the life we see today. If you're receptive to that message and you'd prefer that it not change, if you'd prefer to keep society going as I do, then I would urge you to spread the message, raise awareness and just tell people the urgency of this issue. So when you see bills come up, like one just did about state level AI regulation, I encourage you to support those bills, call your congressman, which you actually can do. Try to build political will and spread the message of like, hey, this AI thing, we really need to stop it as a people, as a regulatory body. I think that's actually a very helpful action people can take.
very noble cause. Well, thank you very much for coming on. Liron, guys, go check out the Doom Debates YouTube channel. You will not be disappointed. Take care.
Thanks, Nate.
The best way to support this channel is to support yourself by gearing up at CanadianPreparedness.com, where you'll find high-quality survival gear at the best prices, no junk, and no gimmicks. Use discount code PREPPINGGEAR for 10% off. Don't forget, the strong survive, but the prepared thrive. Stay safe.